Oh, good. It's actually doing that right now. So I guess it's telling me to start right now. So Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim and Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, everyone. And may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bless you all. Today, inshallah, we will be continuing the tafsir for Surah Nisa. And yesterday we were actually working on وَإِنِ امْرَأَةٌ خَافَتْ مِنْ بَعْلِهَا نُشُوزًا أَوْ إِعْرَاضًا فَلَا جُنَاحَ عَلَيْهِمَا أَنْ يُصْلِحَا بَيْنَهُمَا صُلْحًا وَالصُّلْحُ خَيْرٌ. So we went in details we went in details in regards to the different wordings and some of the comparisons, I guess, between speaking about the women's personality, the ayat, in how it basically talked about men's nushuz as really different than women's nushuz. And we talked about the differences, but many people would actually ask questions, well, why can't she also beat up her husband just like he is permitted to do certain things? Of course, we didn't use the word beat up because the word beat up basically has a different meaning than basically the meaning that the Lugha Arabiya as daraba really means. So we went in detail on some of that. The other piece, and we also talked about, sorry about that. The new workplace is actually new, so. We also went in details in regards to Arab. Can a woman actually turn away because the man is not giving her her rights? Can she basically also leave and admonish the bed? When can she actually do that? We talked about الطلاق للضرر. We talked about الطلاق or divorce due to harm, what kind of harm, and went in details in that regards, and went in details in regards to sulh. But there were some things that I didn't actually talk about, and I thought it was important to talk about in regards to sulh. And let's talk about it right now. So when we speak about wasulh khair, so yes,
Can
this
you maybe, sorry, it is a little bit low, the volume?
you want me to lower the volume?
No, that's better right now. Okay.
Okay. So when we talked about this ayah, of course, وَإِنِ امْرَأَةٌ خَافَتْ, if a woman were to fear that that the husband is basically, of course, right now, I guess, not being the person that he used to be, a person that's turning away from giving her a lot of her rights. And فَلَا جُنَاحَ عَلَيْهِمَا. So the alternative basically for divorce is to bring about a reconciliation, bring about an agreement as an alternative to divorce. So we're not here necessarily reconciliating between them to bring about a relationship normal, let's say normal to the situation that it was. Because he's actually insisting that, well, he's not interested in continuing in this marriage, but we're trying to find a better alternative than divorce. That's what we're trying to do, which is a sulh right there, trying to bring about, well, what if instead of divorce, for example, you've got children, why don't we, for example, maybe, have you reduce at least some nights, or at least if she's accepting to reduce at least some payment or some of the money, etc. But of course, we're not talking about child support here, because child support, no one is basically going to be saying that they would be reducing the child support off the man, because that's a responsibility on the man, period. And the woman is not in charge of actually saying that, oh, we'll remove the child support off your back. You're not the one that's in charge here. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is basically making him responsible of child support. Therefore, that's his responsibility. All right, وَالصُّلْحُ خَيْرٌ. So we went in details in terms of وَالصُّلْحُ خَيْرٌ. So what is good is basically here bring about, it's a better option, and better alternative than divorce is basically a sulh. So what is a sulh and what does it actually go into? So this sulh is basically speaking about the reconciliation, or at least some kind of a common ground between the husband and the wife in regards to wealth, in regards to intimacy. So if, for example, they were to talk about, okay, well, if he's thinking that he wants to get married to a second wife, and he's thinking, I'm going to divorce this wife because, hey, it's not working out anyways, and um, and it's too expensive on me. So she says, how about we reduce the amount of spending that you'll be spending, but I want to stay in this marriage, and reduce let's say they're not agreeing as well on intimacy, and he feels, oh, that's it, it's not going to work out. And they're agreed on certain things in regards to even stay and even intimacy, then in that situation, they can have an agreement. And the reason for all of this, so if we're speaking about, of course, if she wants to choose that, yes, divorce is my only option, and this is my right, this is my honor, etc. That's her choice too. All right. So we did actually go in details about that. But we're speaking about the options of sulh, the options of having a reconciliation. And the reason for that, of course, the more and the further that there would be different disputes, the different frictions, and certainly the more hatred amongst two, then that's basically going to bring about the main recipe for a lot of evil and a lot of hatred and animosity. And if we don't recognize, that basis, then it becomes not only amongst these two people, but it later on starts really reflecting and rubbing even on the children. The children will start hating their father. It becomes a relationship where the children are actually being traumatized by the father, even though I think it's important to mention that it's very often that whenever there is a divorce, or at least let's call it a problem between the husband and the wife, the children end up paying the price. The children end up paying the price for um, both the husband and the wife that are actually in this fight. And the children actually live in trauma. And many times the mother, if the children are with the mother is telling them about the father. If the children are with the father is telling them about their mother. And then the children actually live the trauma that their father or their mother is the most evil person. They just abandoned them. They just did this, and which is not always necessarily true, by the way. It's that the parents are living, of course, in I would say, look at this in the way that it was worded. I'll translate exactly the wording. He said, فإن التمادي على الخلاف والشحناء والمباغضة هي قواعد الشر. He said, for going in transgression in the different dispute, in the different hatred, and even in the different frictions is basically the main key to more evil. And I want you to look at this one. I wanted to underline it because it is true that when we don't recognize that the main evil here is really all that friction, and then it starts expanding its space in where even the family, everybody starts getting included within. And of course, especially right now with the social media giving these different simple diagnoses in where you could just simply copy and paste it on the husband or the wife and basically call them, well, she's basically a person that is an aggressive person, a person that you can't deal with, a person that is a narcissist, a person that is this, and everybody is right now becoming an expert and ready to paintbrush and diagnose. every single one of the people that they're working with, that they are basically with this relationship, with this basically description, with this, I guess, diagnoses. And therefore, yes, they've got just the right way to deal with them. These people are impossible to work with. And therefore, the only way to deal with them is basically to separate and divorce, which is very, very wrong. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created people with different personalities. Certain people, if this is at all not in defense of looking at narcissism at all, but narcissist people are usually the people that are in leadership. This is not actually this is not to defend narcissism at all, but we're looking at narcissist features, let's say it that way. Narcissist features where, of course, a narcissist, there's no way that these people could necessarily, be a good, let's say, foundation for a good personality whatsoever, because this person is just wanting to benefit their own selves. This person is evil, plain evil. But we're talking about certain features of leadership, certain features of knowing how to, I guess, put it certain people to do certain services to get to a certain goal, etc. And it's really common that people can confuse such features with certain, I guess, personalities or certain classifications, and consider that, yes, I've got just this person, and therefore I need to cut them out of my life. And unfortunately, the society that we grew up in, we didn't actually learn how to develop our social skills, and therefore we would simply think that our social skills are not the ones that are lacking in requiring development, but it's the society and this person that just needs to be cut off, period. And this is a problem, really, because if we're going to be cutting off each and every single person that we seem to, I guess, have frictions with or don't know how to deal with them, we seem to just cut them off because we're just going to give them a label that they're impossible to deal with, then we're going to continue regressing and continue going, let's say, even worse in our social skills. So when we're speaking about advancing our social skills, it's learning how to deal with people despite the challenges within their personality. And of course, despite all the challenges, that we learn how to use different social skills, how to learn different social skills in order to let these
I
people
mean,
go.
we learn on the job to how to deal with
You
people,
learn
and
on the
half
job,
of
but
them aren't even Muslim, you
I
know?
agree with you, Nura. We learn on the job, but it seems that, you know, when we're speaking about theory, it's completely different than hands-on. Believe it or not, I have actually seen people that were, let me say, less educated and in simpler and more traditional communities actually have better social skills in dealing with people and with all these different types of personalities than people that are book smart. And that's not just me, giving this anecdotal explanation, but even when you're speaking about statistics, speaking about marriages, tend to actually be more successful in less educated couples than actually in educated couples. So we're looking at, if we're speaking about marriage as one of those ways, or one of those at least areas to measure our social capacities and our social skills, then we're really speaking about a major problem here in how we learn on, let me say, on hands-on and on ground, and how we can implement the theories of how we understand people. If we're really understanding people as if it's a classification and not understanding people in how we develop social skills. It seems that we also lost patience. And this is extremely important. It seems that we lost patience in wanting to learn how to develop new skills, and we would rather just basically cut the relationship, just end the relationship, than actually develop and wait and give more time to learn different new skills on how we can make this work out. And that's one key thing, to learn new skills, to develop your skills. Patience is key. Patience is key. And sometimes when we're speaking about patience, we're not just talking about enduring your emotions. We're also talking about time as well. So emotions to time are really important to learn how to embrace yourself and embrace learning new skills. This is extremely important. And what we're seeing right now is that many couples, the first thing that they rush for, that's it. I really want to end this. This person is classified as A or B classifications. Therefore, hey, my therapist actually said that they're actually classified this way. And unfortunately, therapists are jumping onto the wagon. And many times, many people don't recognize that they're actually, I would say, indoctrinated a lot of times. Even Muslim therapists indoctrinated a lot of times by feminist, I would say, feminist interpretations, and certainly, of course, different interpretations that no don't necessarily come from, let me say it, an objective background, but or from a study, but as much as there is an interpretation that comes from a certain culture in basically interpreting, whether it's an individualist, existentialism, of course, and of course, certainly secularism, feminism, all these different backgrounds, in where it's basically taking them into that interpretation without them realizing. And many, of course, lack. Of course, they graduated. We've got many that are newly graduates, maybe in the mid-30s, etc. And of course, right now graduating, and certainly this person doesn't have experience. And of course, with that lack of experience, they could simply rush in advising a couple to end the relationship because they don't have the experience to actually see that many times you can see and think that a certain relationship, that it's only going towards one route, which is basically right there into an end, but then discover that just give it time, just give it patience, just let those I guess angers cool down, and they'll come back to each other. It's Rabbil Alamin will give that Sa'at al-Rahman. All right, so when we're speaking about uhdarat al-anfus al-shuh, certainly you can actually have a shuh in where greed, it's our own, each and every single person is in search for their own interest, search for their own consideration, of course, and that's basically a piece of all of us. We all have this greed. It's not one person and not the other. We all share this greed. We all share that we want to be considered over our own interests. And of course, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَمَن يُوقَ شُحَّ نَفْسِهِ فَأُولَٰئِكَ هُمُ الْمُفْلِحُونَ. And the people that would keep away their own greed, their own shuh, their consideration, their own interest for their own selves. And in other words, whoever prevents their own selves from being considered over their own selves, but also brings about the consideration for others, those are the people that are muflihun. Those are the people that are going to be successful. Why? They're going to be successful in their life, and they're going to be successful in their hereafter. Why? Because Ishuh itself is actually, I want you to look at this one, is actually one main key. Greed, self-centricity, individualism is a key and a main key to basically abusing other people and preventing them from their rights.
And I want to look at this hadith in where when you're looking at al-bukhl or self-centricity or greed, you look at it, it is actually the main ingredient for a lot of the immorality, in where it's the main ingredient for a lot of meanness, rudeness, and certainly when people are transgressing people's rights, it's because they're self-centered. And that's one thing that we're seeing, that individualism and right now that self-centricity and individualism really taught, I would say, in schools, really spoken about like it is, well, it's you that matter, you that we care about, you that basically that need the love, you. And of course, media is really infusing and infiltrating such philosophy without us realizing. We'll have people that are experts, basically, be presented TED Talk or whatever it is, and they're basically presenting certain ideas, certain philosophies, where people would think of it as if it's motivational speeches. And these motivational speeches, so called, they basically carry a lot of those philosophies. It's you that matter. It's you this, and it's an individualist philosophy. And many times, a lot of the Muslims, in order for them to learn their Islam, they also really need to deconstruct the kufr that they are actually learning within the society. And what we mean deconstruct the kufr that they're learning within the society, Western society, or even if it's a non-Muslim society, I mean, a Arabic society that is based on the culture, probably based on a culture of ananiya, probably based on the culture of the same type of an individualist society, where in Lugha Arabiya, the word is ananiya, and ananiya, it's like a center around myself. And same thing when the Quran when the Quran was revealed, it was deconstructing the culture of kufr that they were living in, the culture that was based
So I
on.
have a question. For the Aqidah class that you're going to be teaching, is that gonna help with that?
No, because the Aqidah class, it's going to be talking about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, about the malaika. So basically the five tenets of faith, al-iman billah wa malaikati kutubi wa rusuli wal yawm al-akhir. So that's what Aqidah is going to be talking about, not the kufr, or at least the deconstructing the philosophies that surround us, because that's going to be in the class, the Western civilization compared to the Muslim civilization. That's a different class.
Oh,
So
okay. Jazakallah khair.
yeah, so that's a different class, because if you're talking about Aqidah, you're talking about Allah, you're talking about the Malaika, you're talking about the things that are considered as metaphysical, the things that are beyond nature. So that's Aqidah. But the deconstructing the philosophy of individualism, feminism, postmodernism, all of that, that's a completely different class. So we're not going to confuse these two classes. That's a completely different.
Okay, we'll look forward to both, inshallah.
Inshallah. All right.
Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullah.
Yeah, I'm sorry. If I may ask, what is the difference between Aqidah and Tawheed?
Oh, Aqidah and Tawheed, they're really the same thing. Exactly the same thing. Yeah, I like that question. Yeah, Aqidah and Tawheed, and sometimes, they'll call it Ilm al-Kalam, really, where they go in details about Asma al-Sifat and the names and descriptions. But really, it's, I would say it's really teaching the same thing and talking about practically, basically the same topics, covering the names of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, covering how we understand the names of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, how are they related to our understanding of God or understanding of Allah, what does the name Allah really come from, what is the root of that name, and the malaika, how do we relate to them? Why is belief in faith in malaika at all important to us? So how are they supposed to be in any way a spiritual connection, in any way? And of course, we will go in details in that regards. Prophets and messengers. When we're speaking about prophets and messengers, there are certain things that we need to relate to the prophets and messengers in terms of not only what they had done in history, but there are certain things that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala ta'ala, why specifically these prophets and messengers? Why is it so important that we learn about the prophets and messengers, that they had actually become part of the tenets and faith? And same thing when we're speaking about the books that were sent on to them. How do we understand the books? Do we believe in the Torah, the Tanakh, or the Injil, or the Talmud, or do we believe in these scriptures? How do we embrace these scriptures, but then at the same time we don't believe that they're the scriptures of Allah Almighty? What does it mean that they had went through some form of addition? What does that even mean? How do we create at least an interfaith, if that's even allowed? What is interfaith? How do we understand these conversations? And the part about Judgment Day, how do we understand Judgment Day? What are the different stages of Judgment Day? What happens on Judgment Day? So what does it mean that we're going to go through these stages, and what happens through each and every single one? And of course, when you live and when you speak about these stages, the more you live and the more you educate yourself about them, the more you're capable of strengthening your iman, because you strengthen your iman by having more knowledge about it. The more knowledge about it, the more you're capable of connecting with it, of course, with it emotionally and physically. Of course, physically, you're changing your behaviors and so forth in regards to how deep you could relate with all these different stations on Judgment Day. And finally, of course, which is qada al qadar, we're speaking about the decree. What does it mean that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had decreed 1, 2, 3 things on me? What does it actually mean that there are certain things that are basically told about me before I was even created? Doesn't that contradict that I have the right and the free will and the freedom of choice? How do we understand these two areas? How do we understand and connect these two dots together, and so forth? So this is what we study in Aqidah. So basically these tenets of faith, that's Aqidah. All right. Tawheed. Tawheed usually is, I would say, less focused on the other things and is more focused on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, him and understanding Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and to understanding the names and attributes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And number 3, of course, understanding what it means to basically do worship, and what does it mean to do shirk. How do we understand these two together? What is shirk in relationship to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? What is shirk in relationship to worship and all of that? So many and oftentimes the word tawheed is more localized, and I would say fixated in regards to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in that angle. But tawheed, in many of the books of Aqidah, they will be, I would say, more comprehensive, as well as really meaning tawheed equals the studies of Aqidah as well. So yeah, you'll find some books, telling it's more localized on Allah, just understanding Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and you'll have other books that basically make it as to really being a synonym to Aqidah itself. All right. Ilm al-Kalam, you will have some scholars actually let it be focused on understanding all these different cults that had passed within history and their debate in regards to the descriptions, the names of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Do we understand it as a metaphor? Do we understand it literally? How do we explain those names? And then they'll go into speaking about the different cults, the Mu'tazila, the Maturidiyya, the Asha'ira, all these different things, and all these different cults, and all these different groups and these different divisions. And they'll go into all these details on Khawarij and all of those. And I don't usually go into all of that. I make it simple and cut, and I feel that to bring about these debates that basically were rampant in time throughout during Muslim time in history, to bring about these conversations and these debates during our times is really to revive them. And alhamdulillah that a lot of these debates have died out. So to revive them again is really definitely the last thing that we would need. And I feel that we right now have a more dangerous a more dangerous misconception within the Muslim community, which is postmodernism, which is atheism. To tackle these issues is a lot more important than tackling a long gone or at least a rarely talked about misconception, and revive it during our times. Bring and talking about whether Quran is created or whether these names are metaphorical or whether these names we understand it literal, and how we understand the details and how we understand all these different conversations. I feel that it is not at all in our benefit and the Ummah's benefit, because we're right now seeing that the Muslim Ummah is really struggling with understanding the ABCs of its Aqidah, let alone responding to the different misconceptions that don't usually happen during our times, because during the times of, at least in Islamic history, the real reason why such debates actually happened was really because it was common that they had relationships, and of course the relationships with the Greek, and we're speaking about at least their books, at least their literature, that was bringing in this conversation, this debate, which right now, of course, our debate is not at all with the Greek and not even with their resources, but
Are
right
we
now.
gonna learn about like the names and attributes of Allah subhanahu wa
Oh
ta'ala?
yeah, definitely.
Oh,
Inshallah.
cool. Yeah,
Oh,
mashallah.
this is
Alhamdulillah.
actually my favorite, and that's probably
Oh, I'm
going.
excited. Alhamdulillah.
Yeah, that's probably going to be 60%, 60%, if probably a little bit more, in learning Aqidah. Because when we're speaking about the names and attributes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, I don't I don't like teaching the names and attributes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in where we're just focused on what not to think about Allah, as much as I would like to connect with, well, what to think about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because the 99 names and attributes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala were there to help you relate with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, to help you relate with sensing and visioning the power of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, with the magnificence of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So the names and attributes, they're not just to be talked about, are they metaphor, are they literal, etc. No, it's how you would relate with the name. It's how you would blend with understanding the name and sensing the magnificence, sensing the encompassment, sensing the ilm, the knowledge of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, in where how you could go beyond just the name to actually seeing its reflections in the world around you, in your own creation, and seeing the reflection in how we see each and every single name and attribute really showing and being something that you could see the signs in each and every single corner in your life. It's basically living Iman. It's living Iman. And this is how I like to teach Aqidah classes. So inshallah, definitely 60% of Aqidah class is going to be on the names and attributes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We're going to go over each and every single name, inshallah. So yes, inshallah. And you'll love the class, inshallah. All right. All right, let's continue. We jumped from speaking about, about this to what were we, yeah, from speaking about basically the tafsir into jumping into aqidah. All right. وإذا آل البخل إلى هذه الأخلاق المذمومة والشيم اللئيمة لم يبقى معه خير مرجو ولا صلاح مأمول. He said, and if we're looking at morality, if it is centered around self-centricity, and of course, if we're speaking about self-centricity, we're speaking about selfishness, it basically becomes the main ingredient for all the different rude behaviors, for all the different transgression. And of course, certainly, then there would be no good left. There would be no good that we could hope for, and certainly no reconciliation. And he said, look at this hadith. The Prophet had told Al-Ansar, basically the residents of Medina, who is your leader? And they said, Al-Jadd ibn Qais ala bukhlin fih. They said, well, our leader is basically Al-Jadd ibn Qais, but he is a greedy person. He's a very selfish person, very greedy. And the Prophet ﷺ said, وَأَيُّ دَوَاءٍ أَيُّ دَاءٍ أَدْوَى مِنَ الْبُخْلِ. He said, in what is a worse disease than stinginess, than greed, simply because that is the center of all evil behaviors. So this basically, it seemed like, they were, now this is probably when they were talking about maybe a narcissist person right there. And the Prophet ﷺ said, well, the centricity of a person being around themselves is basically the mother of all evils. It's basically the main ingredient of all immorality. And they said, how is that possible, O Prophet of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? The Prophet ﷺ said, إِنَّ قَوْمًا نَزَلُوا بِسَاحِلِ الْبَحْرِ بِسَاحِلِ الْبَحْرِ فكرهوا لبخلهم فكرهوا لبخلهم نزول الأضياف. So basically this group, they went onto, had a basically a ride in the sea, and they hated فكرهوا, not كرهوا, but فكرهوا لبخلهم نزول الأضياف. They hated that they would get basically incomers. They didn't want people coming to them because they didn't want to share. They didn't want to be hospitable. So they basically said, well, let the men be on a side and the women be on a side. That way, the men, if they were asked, well, we're supposed to be being hospitable, why don't you present something to us, anything? But then the men will say, oh, the women are not here to really do the job in order to help us, present something. Sorry about that. And the women, whenever they would be asked, well, hey, why didn't you present anything? Can you share something? They would basically say, oh, the men are actually far away. Sorry, but we've got nothing to present to you. And then what happened? It basically, with time, the men, they basically ended up at فاشتغل الرجال بالرجال والنساء بالنساء. So the men basically, they just started, of course, having the dramas, men around with men and women with women. In other words, this created that area in where division amongst the people, and then amongst them, and of what happened in where, when we're speaking about self-centricity, it basically becomes the main ingredient where you're just centered around yourself. You're creating all that interest to be just for you, and then the other people will not fear that you care about them, in where they too will continue distancing themselves away from you, and it becomes this division that goes farther and farther away. And it could actually be, I tried to research this, but really I couldn't really find if this really is the case, because when you look at فاشتغل الرجال بالرجال, it can mean drama, and it can also mean, in لغة عربية, when we say اشتغل الرجال بالرجال, it could also mean a type of, let's call it an aberration in the relationship, in where men and men and women and women, that there was some kind of an aberration in the relationship. And what I mean by an aberration, it can be a social aberration, and it can also be a sexual aberration. I haven't really found answers whether this is also insinuating that there was a sexual aberration as well. But in Lugha Arabiya, this can also insinuate to really mean that. I haven't really come across yet, I didn't do enough research to see whether the scholars had regarded that this was more of اشتغل الرجال بالرجال to mean a social aberration, to mean a social misbehavior, or whether it also extended to a sexual misbehavior as well. So I haven't really found answers to that. But at the end of the day, in where we're speaking about that, the Prophet ﷺ was basically giving that I guess explanation to the Sahaba that having this personality, yes, he's the leader, but this person is self-centered, and that basically acts as a main key to bring about division within the society, to bring about division even amongst the people around you. Because when you don't show any care for the other person, then the other person is going to basically start being considerate over their own selves and not being considerate over you, because they would feel that they're being disregarded. They would feel that you're not caring about them, therefore they need to care about themselves. And it is part of our own nature that we care about ourselves. So the second that we feel that you're disregarding me, by nature, I'm going to disregard and basically retaliate in the same manner that you are basically expressing and you are revealing. And then we're basically going to be embracing the same type of bukhl, the same type of self-centricity, and that basically creates any bond, that creates the main division for any bond, and that basically starts bring about that cut in the relationship. All right, and of course, وَإِن تُحْسِنُوا وَتَتَّقُوا, it's basically right there. In تُحْسِنُوا وَتَتَّقُوا is basically speaking to the husband and the wife, and this is in order to remember that yes, you did actually have in Allah يأمر بالعدل والإحسان, and yes, and encouraging al-ihsan. In other words, it's basically giving, even though it's, of course, the basis is really that you would give this much and I would give this much, basically a fair trade-off and a fair at least comparison, in where we're comparing each other. I'm giving this much, I'm investing this much, therefore you would basically give me in return this much, or whatever. It doesn't have to be a quantity, but it can be also a certain behavior. But of course, in the ayat, in tuhsinu wa tattaqu, you could say that it has a different meaning for the husband and the wife relationship, because you want to keep in mind that yes, in imra'atun khafat, when we're looking at the part of speech in this sentence, in where it's not necessarily directing at the women compared to the ayah that we did in ayah 35. Let's go back to it and see the part of speech again. I believe it was it 75? Let me go back to it and see. No. We're going to get to the A and just look at the part of speech and how the part of speech was actually coming out differently. Let's look at the part of speech and really compare. Where's the, okay, so let's compare the part of speech and really see. We're talking about A number 35 right there. All right, so let's find it. In where, وَإِن خِفْتُمْ, no, here we go. وَاللَّاتِي تَخَافُونَ نُشُوزَهُنَّ فَعِظُوهُنَّ وَهْجُرُوهُنَّ فِي الْمَضَاجِعِ. Look at the part of speech here. And the women that you fear that they would basically, of course, go into a revolution, or basically bring about disability, or the instability, sorry, not disability, but instability within the household, then this is what you need to do. We talked about that before. But I want to look at the part of speech here in there, in where وَالَّاتِي تَخَافُونَ, in where it's directed at the man. But when you look at here, the part of speech is not directed at the women, even though it's actually talking about in nushuz from the men, or al-i'rad. وَإِنِ امْرَأَةٌ خَافَتْ مِنْ بَعْلِهَا. So the part of speech is more of a third person. In imra'atun, if a woman were to fear, but the other one, the part of speech was if you fear. This is directing at the man. So in this situation, we do actually sense that there is a wali involved, because this is not talking to the women. This is talking about, well, in situations where women are afraid of their husbands actually not giving them their rights, that there is a wali involved in this case. This is extremely important. You won't necessarily see it in the translation, but you could see it in the word and the part of speech that it's in where, and yet you could see that the part of speech shifted. This is where this piece of it, you could see that in the beginning, the part of speech was becoming a third person if a woman were to this, but then the part of speech shifted right here, وَإِن تُحْسِنُوا وَتَتَّقُوا, in where it's directing at you. The part of speech in English, to transfer or to change the part of speech is basically considered incoherent, but in Lugha Arabiya, this is not incoherent. In Lugha Arabiya, you can actually shift the part of speech. And of course, here's the part of speech shifting within what is considered the same sentence, in where the part of speech shifted from being a third person to being basically a second person right there. In tuhsinu wa tattaqu, shifted to speaking directly to the man, speaking directly to the women, and basically more directed at the men than the women. In tuhsinu wa tattaqu fa inna Allah kana bima ta'maluna khabira, if of course directing at the men mainly. Why did we say it's more directing at the men than the women? It's directing more at the man because it's the woman that is feeling abused here. So if she's feeling abused, of course, and certainly Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was right there emphasizing that there is some form of real nushuz, i'rad, he was turning away. In other words, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala even described it as nushuz. So certainly the Quran does relate to the situation that she really is the victim here. She really is the victim, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was not wanting her to continue being more of a victim, in where if a relationship were to end, she might actually be even in a worse situation. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given an alternative. Well, can we do islah? Can we bring about a reconciliation here? And of course, it differs from one relationship to another. What you might consider as your priority, someone else might not consider as a priority. What this husband considers as a priority and what they seek in a marriage, the other person might seek something else, and the third person, etc. So each and every single one considers one thing, and that's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was letting it be a more comprehensive wording, in where just bring about a reconciliation, try to figure something out, in where right there, who's trying to figure this out? Another party that's trying to bring about some form or an arbitration, some form of reconciliation, because sometimes the husband and the wife, they're confused, their conversation has really become so heated, in where it really is coming to a dead end. So where a third party is, what their job is supposed to be doing is trying to bring about that conversation, at least the beginning of a conversation or a beginning of a relationship. Rather, if they couldn't, then please step on aside, and don't necessarily think that you always have to have your opinion in regards to a relationship. And this is very common, that we would see people know that husband and wife, X and Y, are having some kind of a tension, and everybody wants to basically say their opinion on the matter. And of course, without them realizing that the relationship was, a lot of it, 70% of it, was actually behind closed doors. So what you don't know is actually more than what you know. So if you really want to help the couple get back together, please save your opinion. Please just stay out of it. That's the best way to help them. Whether you are a sister, you're a brother, just stay out of it, and don't worry. They will, inshallah, bring about this conversation together. And the most thing that they want right now is really less people getting involved, because the more people getting involved, the wider the wider the area of that problem, of that drama, and we're getting more people heating the conversation. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is redirecting right there the conversation to really direct it at the man, and saying, وَإِن تُحْسِنُوا وَتَتَّقُوا, if you were to really embrace al-ihsan and the taqwa. But here's one thing. Why didn't Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala just say, hey, you're supposed to be practicing adl here? And why can't we just say, well, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was supposed to tell them, if you practice adl, then that's going to be the main key. Well, this ayah takes us elsewhere to explain, وَلَن تَسْتَطِيعُوا أَن تَعْدِلُوا بَيْنَ النِّسَاءِ وَلَوْ حَرَصْتُمْ. There's no way in a polygamous marriage that you can be completely and 100% fair amongst women, no matter how hard you worked. Wait a minute, what? There's no way? There's no way. Wait, how do we understand all of this? So there's no way that they could actually be in adl. So that means Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling them, don't even try? No. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, فَلَا تَمِيلُوا كُلَّ الْمَيْلِ. Then what you need to really work on is that you're supposed to be working on not going far in, of course, in bending, or at least in practicing favoritism from one woman towards one woman to another. You have to work hard. So how do we understand that? Are we talking about, okay, well, I guess I can't be fair, then therefore a fair amount, whatever that oxymoron means? No. Where the Prophet ﷺ explained this piece of it. And he said, Ya Allah, this is my ability. This is the amount that I'm capable of being fair in, whether we're speaking about splitting the number of nights, or whether we're speaking about the relationship in terms of the ability. But then there's one side that you don't control of, and he has no control of. And he said, Allahumma hadha qasmi fima amlik fala talumni fima tamlik wala amlik. Ya Allah, this is the amount that I'm capable of controlling, so don't hold me accountable for what you control and I don't control, which is basically love. And of course, the relationship with it that basically results out of love, in where the number of times of intimacy and all of that, that basically is also a piece of that mail qalbi. Now, one thing is that when you look at, we're still not finished with answering the question. So we're not supposed to be actually telling the man to be in justice here. No, we are definitely. We are definitely, but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is basically, leaving as if this conversation here is not necessarily complete, in where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is basically leaving it for you to know that, yes, there can be different narratives. He's defending himself, she's defending herself, and each and every single one is bringing about this narrative to basically support themselves and support their argument. But once we have tried to bring about a sulh, which is really to work out justice, but then justice, we tried to work it out, was sulhu khair. The sulh is really bring about justice, bring about where both parties are satisfied with the agreement. At least sometimes we don't necessarily agree with everything, but we compromised. We were just trying to, when we're speaking about compromise, we're really just for the sake of the relationship. Yes, I don't fully agree, but I'm just going to let go on this and let go on that, just to basically win something else. And they tried to win something else, but then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was telling you, okay, they tried to compromise. They tried with the sulh, is basically at least both parties agree. It's definitely the best to bring about a fair ground, a fair, and of course, a fair conversation. But even if that doesn't happen, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is encouraging the man, even if you feel that maybe it's not a fair trial, or even if because you're shuh, because of your self-centricity, you basically felt that, no, why am I paying for all of this? Why am I being in this marriage where it's not bringing in what I want this marriage to bring me. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala then says, وَإِن تُحْسِنُوا وَتَتَّقُوا. It's a form of donation. It's a form of giving. It's a form of a level of piety, even if it is not for your sake, but it is for al-ihsan, it's for the sake of this woman. So even if you don't like the woman, even if you don't necessarily feel that you want her as a wife, but here's one place of ihsan that you can practice. وَتَتَّقُوا, and have taqwa. So what is having taqwa? In other words, when you want to practice ihsan, you don't brag to her and say, hey, you do recognize that I'm in this relationship really because I know that you would be homeless if you weren't in this marriage. So I'm just really doing it for your sake, but I really am not interested in you. That's not practicing taqwa. That is basically letting you lose the investment that you had put in. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَلَا تُبْطِلُوا صَدَقَاتِكُمْ بِالْمَنِّ وَالْأَذَى. And do not void whatever investment, whatever donation, investment, it could be money, investment could be something that in terms of behavior, could be a compromise that you had done. بِالْمَنِّ وَالْأَذَى. Don't void it by men. What is it, men? Men is bragging. Il-adha is harm. It's like, yeah, I gave you this much. I invested this much. I stayed in the marriage not because I care about you, not because I love you, but because, hey, I'm trying to be good to you. I'm basically, pitying you. If you weren't going to be in this relationship, probably going to be homeless. Your family doesn't even care about you. Your family are probably, some kind of people that are drunk or whatever it is. And what are you doing right there? You're bragging. You're harming her. This is adha right there. In that situation, you had basically lost the akhirah and even lost the dunya. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is basically right there trying to support women's rights and telling them, well, in those situations, I'm trying to recommend, I'm trying to push the men to compromise even further, even when they're not interested, in order to basically maintain a relationship, maintain the woman, and trying to encourage them. And this is extremely important to mention, in where a lot of the Islamic centers in America, for example, or in the West, this is what they're really trying to embrace, which is trying to, and many times women might actually misunderstand what is happening. And let me put a couple things, kind of like what we do in math and physics, and where a couple things to put in data. Data number one, that these Islamic centers don't actually have power to force the upper hand. And let me use that as a metaphor, to mean the man here who's in leadership, usually who's got the money, he's been working, and you've been actually a housewife, not working. And it's definitely not fair that you were taking care of the household, he was really working to make the money, and all of a sudden you basically are in this relationship where, yes, he's probably interested all of a sudden in getting married to someone else, and you were really trying to save the money, trying to do money management, and now the money management that you had done is basically right now being investment for a second family. Wait a minute, I was trying to do all the money management for the sake of probably buying a bigger house, or probably, a better life, or probably, a better life basically on all ends. And now here it is, now we're going into another, opening another household rather than expanding our household. This happens often. And of course, she feels that, well, a minute, this was definitely not fair on my end, what just happened. And certainly a lot of women might actually find themselves that not only did all the money management, all the savings, and all the hard work that she was doing, it paid off not for her, but for someone else, whether it's for his pleasure or whether for another woman that just came in after probably maybe 15 years of marriage, that she basically was working together. They were working together to get his papers done, to probably get his degree and probably start a job, and we're finally stable, and finally we probably just started buying at least what a little bit of what we had hoped for, etc. And then right now, what are we going into? Basically a different kind of an investment, and somebody else is getting it the easy way. What? She's all of a sudden coming in and getting all the privileges that I had worked hard for all these years. Here are a number of things. Definitely, data number one, like we said, is definitely these Islamic centers. They are aware that a lot of women are basically abused in these relationships, but they don't have the power to enforce, let me say, supporting these women. They don't have the power. Whenever you have a victim, if you don't have the power to defend them, you too will basically be crushed. So what these Islamic centers are really trying to do is really work towards trying to bring about the good in these men. Most, and yes, this is not me and in any way, trying to be a feminist or whatever. No. But it is true that in most relationships, women are the victims. That is actually true. There is no doubt about that. There is no doubt about that. That women end up in, basically, they are more susceptible to being the victims than the man. Why? Because he's been working. He's got the money. She's connected with the kids. She herself, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala made it part of her own instinct that she's so connected to the kids that there's no way that she's going to give up on them. It's part of her instinct. It's part of her nature that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala just made her a person of compassion, a person of giving, a person that she's willing to compromise everything. Even if she's living a hell of a life, she's willing to just compromise, just to be around her kids and be there. And they're a lot more loyal. She's willing to compromise everything. That's why even Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala told women, don't get married to somebody that is not Muslim. Why? Because he knows that she can go as far for her nature and her, of course, nature and centricity around her own nature and around her family. It can actually go as far as risking her own faith. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, no, don't even risk your faith. But I won't. I'll be strong. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, I know how I created you. I know what your nature is made of. I know how loyal you are to your children and your family. So therefore, I want you to recognize that I don't want you to risk your faith in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and end up really risking your dunya and akhirah. So that's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is basically right there, letting you know in where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is giving that encouragement to the men. Do ihsan, have taqwa. Remember, these women are a lot more vulnerable. So the Islamic centers, because they don't have the power to defend the women, because they don't have the power to support the women, many times in the conversation, women will feel that he didn't even recognize me, he didn't even hear me, he didn't listen to my argument, etc. He basically went against me and all of that. two things. Number one, yes, this imam at the Islamic Center, maybe he didn't really fully hear you. Maybe it is true. But at the same time, you want to keep in mind that what they're trying to get sometimes is really the good in this abusive person, really. It could be really obvious. This person is an abusive person. But if with people that have shuh, with people that are abusive, to really call them abusive on the spot, they'll just get تأخذهم العزة بالإثم. They'll basically even become more abusive. And it's really sad that we find ourselves at the Islamic centers really, even though we recognize that person is an abusive person, but we find ourselves really needing to literally beg this person to really have empathy, sympathy, and really care for this woman and the children. That's what we're trying to induce, really. We're really trying to just get this person to somehow have some empathy. But most of the times, of course, what we end up really with is we're trying to bring about a reconciliation, trying to let this person have some form of maw'idha, because that's all we could do. What happens on ground is that a lot of times women, they would come forward and thinking that, and here's one thing, unfortunately, many times women would think that, yes, the Islamic Center is supposed to be there ruling and not necessarily judging, or sorry, reconciliating. So she would think that I'm supposed to be here, the Islam says this, and she'll basically read, certain things in certain Islamic books, and Islam says this is my right, this is what he's supposed to do, this is what he's not supposed to do. She's trying to lay out some form of a pragmatic thing, and then she, with her not recognizing that you're talking to an Islamic center that doesn't have the power to do that. And what they're trying to do is really really change the whole conversation to something else. So she's coming in trying to, bring about and advocate for herself. But what she might not recognize is that at that moment, she's really fueling more of, let's say, the separation than actually bring about. So she's working against what the Imam is doing. The Imam is really trying to bring about a reconciliation. And what she's really trying to do is really dismantle all the effort that he's trying to put in. This happens often. And how does she do that? She goes in details, story after story, story after story, story after story. And these stories, they become endless stories. And she will spend hours and hours speaking about one story after story, and such a day, and one day, etc. We were walking down the street and he did this. He basically pushed the cart and he pushed it against me. And then I was doing this and he told me to get the cart, but no, he yelled it to me and he told me this. And then it becomes an endless conversation. What does the Imam then feel? That, no, this is taking too much time. 3 hours, 4 hours, thinking that you had ended it? No. 5 hours, session 1, session 2, session 3, session 4, and then not to mention the phone calling, not to mention the messages on WhatsApp, the messages this, and it becomes an endless conversation where animosity, hate, anger was fueling and accumulating throughout these years. There's no way that we can solve it in a couple hours, not 10, not 20, not 30, not 40 hours. And it becomes really a relationship that this Imam cannot help. So what does the Imam start doing? He starts avoiding answering the phone calls, starts avoiding the conversation. And it's usually, sorry, ladies, just as I said that you were the victims, I think it's important to say many times the sisters lose their argument by bringing in too many words within the argument. They think they're advocating for themselves, but they're talking too much and losing the argument by talking too much. What happens is not that you're defending yourself, but you're losing the case by putting in man kathura kalamu kathura saqatu. If you talk too much, you will basically find yourself exposing a lot of your mistakes, exposing a lot of the things that you had done. And this often happens where I would hear sometimes just the woman's side of the story, and she would say and think that she's presenting her case as a victim, when in reality, what she had really done is exposed the mistakes that she had done without her realizing. So she then transfers herself from being a victim to all of a sudden being the person that is the abuser here, just with her own words, even though she could be the victim. She could be the victim, but she oftentimes loses the case because she loses the whole object and the whole, the whole idea of what the Islamic Center can do. The Islamic Center can only really try to give you some form of sulh, some form of reconciliation, some form of maw'idha to the man, to you. That's all that they could do. But to actually think that the imam is going to say, hey, this is how much you owe her and this is what you have to do. He can do that, but guess what? Does he really have the power to enforce that? If the person didn't have taqwa to treat you when you guys were married on the word of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you think this person is going to have taqwa to actually pay you when you're divorced? He didn't even have the taqwa when you guys were married. Is he going to have the taqwa to actually pay you when you're divorced? Absolutely not. The shaitan is going to come in there, even if he's a man of faith, and he's going to tell him, well, guess what? She basically is nashes. That's why shaitan will come in. Shaitan will come into the man and say, she's nashes. And therefore, since she's nashes, she doesn't have the right for alimony, doesn't have the right for her.
What does that mean?
Nashes basically means that she is not a pious wife. And therefore, remember, we talked about
Oh, from no shoes. Okay.
Exactly, from the shoes. So yeah, so she basically loses her right for alimony in nafaqa and loses her right for her mahar. So therefore, she doesn't really have any rights, and therefore, you don't have to pay her anything. And what that imam said, yeah, you're not going to judge by it. You're going to basically reject that because, hey, he's not a qadi, he's an imam. That's what shaitan will actually say, even though it's actually not true. You want to keep in mind, if that imam, and this is what a lot of people, they have to understand, pay attention to this one. If that imam was sitting as a qadi, and he is specialized in that, okay? If this imam has an Islamic studies degree and is right now taking the position of a qadi, his words are lazima. What does that mean? His words, they become like the words as if it's the Quran. It's incumbent and obligatory on the man or the woman to take his judgment. Khalas. Not to say, no, I actually want to appeal. I want to go for another imam. No, I didn't like his opinion, and I want to go for a third and go. No, here there was already a judgment right there. That's it. That becomes lazima. That becomes incumbent upon you. If the qadi said you owe her, for example, $50,000 in compensation for, I don't know, maybe you threw a vase in her face and you basically scarred her face, and the qadi said, oh, this person, this qadi, this imam, he basically said you owe her $50,000. His words are lazima. You owe her $50,000. It becomes incumbent upon you on Judgment Day. but it wasn't me. It was her that basically was running after me. She fell, and then her face basically went against the vase. But she said, I threw it at her. Let's just assume that is true. And he knows that that lady created a lie. She ran after him. She trips over, I don't know, some toy that was on the floor and basically scars her face. He didn't throw the vase, but she insisted, no, you threw the vase at me. That's what you meant to do. And he was like, I didn't even throw it. Let's just assume she was a liar and he was actually right. It wasn't his fault. But the qadi, he believed her argument. Still, that becomes incumbent upon the man to pay $50,000 in compensation according to what that qadi had ruled. But I know she's a liar. But still, at the end, you have to pay her. But if she lied and she managed to manipulate the qadi, pay attention to this one, managed to manipulate the qadi, the Prophet ﷺ said, لعل بعضكم يكون ألحن بحجته من بعض. Some of you might be more eloquent in putting and stating their argument. But the Prophet ﷺ said, I would judge based on what I hear. أنا بشر. What was that? أقضي على نحو ما أسمع. I would judge based on what I'm hearing. But if I ruled for you with something that you don't have the right to take, then know that on Judgment Day, you would carry that. So give it back. In other words, if you know that Imam made a wrong judgment and you lied about it, okay, certainly the Imam made the judgment and the man has to pay the $50,000. But if you knew that that was based off wrong information, then in that situation, you don't actually have the right to take the $50,000. You don't have the right to take it, the $50,000, and you have to have taqwa. But at the end, we're just laying out those different areas. So when the Imam at the masjid basically even does a statement or a final statement that is against what you think is fair, what you had read in Islamic studies books were to say. And of course, I'm not talking about something where the Imam really made a mistake in an Islamic ruling, and where he might have said, for example, yes, do this, and you discover, or it was basically a wrong misunderstanding for the ayah. That's a completely different thing. But I'm talking about in interpreting the case. If the Imam made a judgment, that becomes incumbent upon both parties to basically abide by that judgment. Making it clear here. So let's continue. And then when you're looking at this ayah, وَإِن تُحْسِنُوا وَتَتَّقُوا, if you were to practice ihsan and taqwa. What is taqwa? Al-ihsan is different than taqwa. Al-ihsan is basically when you're compromising, and with the compromise, you know that probably such a compromise really doesn't belong to the other person, but you're just giving it for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, not for the sake of the person. That's an ihsan. For the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, not for the sake of the person. I know she doesn't deserve it. Or I know he doesn't deserve it. But it's for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. وَتَتَّقُوا. Taqwa is to avoid, is basically to avoid, within this context, of course, is to avoid wrong behaviors and to stay away from what is a slippery slope, and to basically stay away from the wrong behaviors and the wrong things in order to embrace Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's content. That's what taqwa is. So let me put that on ground. The man knows that he does have the power, and definitely she's more of a victim, that he does have the power to deny her rights, and basically she doesn't even have the money to pay for a lawyer to get all of that. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells them, yes, you need to keep your taqwa. You need to maintain your taqwa and don't let your own shaitan direct you to abusing even farther. And don't let your shaitan abuse, of course, abuse the fact, and you abuse the fact that you might have more power, that you might have more money, that you might have probably the ability to hire more lawyers, to bring about a case, to probably have live in a better circumstance, because she's been basically trying to invest all her life. She's been working at home, maintaining the kids, taking care of the household, maintaining it really for who? For you. And even if the man were to say, well, I was working and I was paying the bills, I was feeding, I was doing all of that. Here's one thing. SubhanAllah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala made women be creatures of giving. And this is important to keep in mind. Made them be creatures of giving. That's what a mother is, a creature of giving. So do not abuse when she gives. Same thing for a wife. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَلِلرِّجَالِ عَلَيْهِنَّ دَرَجَةً. وَلِلرِّجَالِ عَلَيْهِنَّ دَرَجَةً actually means that it's not a mutual, it's not at the same level. Man and a woman, a husband and a wife, they're not necessarily equal in their rights. Yeah, they're not equal. According to the Quran, yes, they're not fully equal. وَلِلرِّجَالِ عَلَيْهِنَّ دَرَجَةً actually means there's a bigger responsibility on the woman towards her husband than the other way around. That's actually saying that that's not completely equal. And the Prophet ﷺ actually said, وَاسْتَوْصُوا بِالنِّسَاءِ خَيْرًا. The Prophet ﷺ basically was in the farewell speech, we talked about it yesterday, was basically telling the men that they really have to take care of the women, that there's a will that the Prophet ﷺ was basically saying right there. But he also said, فَإِنَّهُنَّ عَوَانٌ عِنْدَكُمْ. They're like hostages. They're really investing so much, really not for themselves, but for you. So don't abuse that. Don't abuse that. And that's the same. That's why we're saying, if we might say, well, yeah, we want to encourage women to work, etc., but what we're really doing, I'm not necessarily saying don't work. It depends on this case by case. I wouldn't necessarily tell women don't work, and I wouldn't necessarily tell women to work. Every single case has its own scenario, and the circumstances, they vary from one person to another. So therefore, it's not one word, that fits every single situation. But I would generally just say, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and the Prophet was, they were both really displaying that women, they're basically investing, and they love investing within their household, within their marriage, because to them, it's part of their nature. But don't abuse it. That's what the Prophet ﷺ was basically telling the men. Don't abuse the fact that it is part of their nature to give, that it's part of their nature to basically be there investing for the sake of the family. Even a simple thing. She would be sleeping and the kids, Mom, I need to do this. Mom, do this. And she's not getting a good sleep. She's not, when she's eating, constantly getting up to basically do different things because wanting to be at everybody's service. So not during her comfort, she's completely comfortable, and not during her moment of just doing the chores, it's enough because there's more piled up. So in that situation, to practice ihsan, that's basically what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling you, that the best ihsan that you can actually practice. The Prophet ﷺ basically said that the best donation that you would give is basically the donation to your wife. And what we mean by donation, it's not, oh, here's $50. No, shut up. No, that's not what it is. A donation is not an issue of money only, but a donation is you see that she's tired, help around. You see that she needs that support. Get up, get yourself, maybe fix her a breakfast, maybe fix her something. Maybe just that day, she's not in a mood. She's about to get her period. Make her feel better. Just understand, just compromise for that day. Even if she's wrong, just let it go. That's why the Prophet ﷺ actually said, خيركم خيركم لنسائه. The best one is really the best to his wives. Why? It was really to encourage you that the real compromise, the real akhlaq are really the ones that you practice at home, not in public. It's so easy to practice akhlaq in public. You know why? Because everybody is being formal with you anyways. So you're going to be practicing some form of formality. It's so easy to put on a mask of formality, a mask of akhlaq for a couple of hours when you're in public. But wearing it all the time at home, now that's hard. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling you that the real akhlaq, the real core of who you are, is really how you practice in what you practice at home. How and what kind of a person you are at home. And that's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is basically here. وَإِن تُحْسِنُوا وَتَتَّقُوا فَإِنَّ اللَّهَ كَانَ بِمَا تَعْمَلُونَ خَبِيرًا. For the Lord Almighty, if you practice ihsan, you give that compromise, you give that taqwa, even though you're capable of probably letting that person regret all the transgression that they had done to you, but you practice taqwa and you live the word of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you live the principle of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then the Lord Almighty is the one. فَإِنَّ اللَّهَ كَانَ بِمَا تَعْمَلُونَ خَبِيرًا. I want you to look at here, when you look at فَإِنَّ اللَّهَ كَانَ بِمَا تَعْمَلُونَ خَبِيرًا and not فَإِنَّ اللَّهَ خَبِيرًا بِمَا تَعْمَلُونَ. When you look at فَإِنَّ اللَّهَ كَانَ بِمَا تَعْمَلُونَ خَبِيرًا, it's different فَإِنَّ اللَّهَ كَانَ خَبِيرًا بِمَا تَعْمَلُونَ. Why? فَإِنَّ اللَّهَ كَانَ بِمَا تَعْمَلُونَ, it's what you actually do, what you invest, what you behave in, that's what basically brings in the mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's what brings in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's acknowledgement of every single investment that you had invested in. That's when you will basically draw Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's content over you, draw Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's mercy over you, draw Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's maghfirah and forgiveness over you. What draws that? It's basically bima ta'amalun, what you invest, what you do, what relationship you try to bring in. وَلَن تَسْتَطِيعُوا أَن تَعْدِلُوا بَيْنَ النِّسَاءِ وَلَوْ حَرَصْتُمْ. Now, this actually takes us into a different corner. وَلَن تَسْتَطِيعُوا, and you won't be capable of being just amongst the women, no matter how hard you try. Why? Why is it that hard to be fair to women? Is it even hard? A couple of things here. This is talking about polygamous relationships. All right. And is it talking about one woman as well? So here's one thing, is that as women, I used to hate it during my feminist times when I would read a statement in a book of tafsir when it would be talking about women being emotional beings. I used to think that that was so condescending to say. And I used to think that that was such a misogynist statement, that it carries a lot of misogyny in where you're regarding that women cannot be rational beings and therefore they cannot be beings that would recognize right and wrong, and that they're basically more susceptible to committing dhulm. And I used to feel that that carries within it a lot of misogyny and certainly a lot of a lot of, or at least the main ingredient to abusing women. And I used to believe that. SubhanAllah. But it isn't until I really went into people's problems. I've been, I guess, working in dealing with people's problems for almost 20 years now. And SubhanAllah, there's a completely different, what is the word that I could say? An assessment to make in theory is completely different than when you actually live on ground and deal with those marriages and with the disputes and hear both sides and all of that. And you recognize that there's a lot of emotion that women like to focus on. Yet men are more pragmatic. This is what I did. This is what needs to be done. This is how men would actually think. Pragmatic. A and B, you've got a problem. Here's how you could solve it. End of the story. But women, no. They're not necessarily always looking for a solution to the problem. This is really strange. I didn't really know that that was the case until I actually lived it. Even if I'm a woman, sometimes I may not understand even myself. You will see
That's
that,
true, subhanallah.
Wallahi al-Azim,
Because
subhanallah,
when you're kind of like, that's how you are. That's how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala
exactly.
created you.
You
So
would live in your own
subhanallah.
bubble and you would think, no, I understand myself. I understand where I'm going. I'm trying to make a rational statement here. I'm trying to make an argument. And without you realizing, sometimes there can be there can be multiple factors that are, that are, I guess, playing a role in how the argument is really displayed. So you would see that there's a lot of focus on emotions in a woman's conversation. He didn't regard this. I was tired. I was this. I mean, I'm not saying that this isn't to be, something to be considerate of, but I'm just saying that, a book that I would always recommend to read. There's even an audio for it, an hour and 45 minutes. Women are from Venus and men are from Mars, or is it men are from, yeah, okay. Anyhow, you know what book I'm talking about. Definitely read that book. Recommend that book for men and women to really see the differences in the way that they lay out their vision, they lay out their priorities, they lay out, the way that we talk. At many times, we don't recognize that it really reflects the way our brains have been programmed. Your brain is programmed in where if your focus is on emotion, you're going to talk about the circumstance, the situation based on basically the emotional side of it. Men are programmed in where, no, it's more of a physics, more of programmed in where it's math. Here's the problem, here's the solution, end of the story, and that's it. But no, she's not looking for a solution. She's actually looking for an emotion. She's looking to ventilate. She's actually looking for a word. She's asking you. And this is one common problem that many times in marriages, what usually happens and what I have come across is that women are not straightforward in what they want. Men are. But here's one problem. Men don't know how to say what they want. They don't know how to say it. They don't know how to express it. Or they might know how to express it, but they don't express it because they feel that it harms their masculinity. Women, on the other hand, they don't want to express exactly what is wrong with them because they feel that it takes away how special that would be. So what would she do? She would, let's say she wants to go out on a date with you. Okay. And I'm talking about a halal date. Okay. So she might actually get into an angry moment and say she's not feeling well and all of that. And the man is all question marks like, what, not feeling well? Oh, sure. How about let's watch a movie together, or maybe let's I don't know, listen to Mufti Mink or whatever it is together. And she's like, no, 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 you're not understanding me. And it's like, I'm not understanding you. Okay, you want me to help you fix the laundry? Anything? What can I do? He's completely clueless as to what she wants. She probably wants a flower, maybe wants him. Oh, did you forget that today was our anniversary? And he's like, anniversary? What day was it? And he can't even remember the anniversary. But to her, that's a special day, and where there's a special charisma that was supposed to be played in bringing about a flower, taking her out on probably the favorite restaurant that they were together when they went and they were engaged, and etc., because she wants to revive a certain sentiment. And he's completely clueless. He's completely clueless. And she's not vocalizing exactly what she wants. And he's thinking that, oh, maybe we need to do this. And then they go into a problem when it was really simple and straightforward. Just say, this is what you want, to revive what you want, to basically help him. Hey, you give him the flower if he doesn't know how to bring it, or maybe tell him, hey, tomorrow is this is what you need to do. Men just don't know how to display it. They don't understand. They don't understand what your hidden messages are supposed to be basically helping him understand. They don't understand it. Say it straightforward. And same thing, ladies, don't display too many hidden messages. Say it straightforward. They're not going to understand it. And for the men, please understand how to help these women sometimes, I guess, live their femininehood, because there is a hadith. And although yesterday, I don't know why I missed it yesterday, but I just wanted to, I guess, mention this one, in where the Prophet ﷺ, I'm just going to take you to the hadiths, and so you could actually see it right there. All right, although I'm actually side to display it, but I'm just going to display it in the words in the hadith. The Prophet ﷺ, look at this hadith, where the Prophet ﷺ actually said, لا يقعن أحدكم على امرأته كما تقع البهيمة وليكن بينهما رسول. قيل وما الرسول يا رسول الله؟ قال القبلة والكلام. The Prophet ﷺ said, don't. Of course, the word yaqa'an actually means to fall, but this is not to literally fall, but this is metaphorically. The Prophet ﷺ is really displaying adab here. In other words, when you're being intimate, don't just basically start with the relationship right away the way that an animal would start a relationship. But let there be, he used the word rasul, a message, a messenger, a type of a start, something to fuel a relationship. And they said, well, what is that messenger? What is that, I guess, that trigger? And he said, al-qublatu wal-kalam, a kiss and words. In other words, what is the Prophet ﷺ right here saying? That what women want is really these two areas. Let her hear words of emotion, words of romance, and let there be a certain touch that she would feel from you. And this is basically the main recipe of what would actually make that woman really get close to you. And trust me, happy wife, happy life. You make your wife happy, she's going to make your life happy. Trust me, because she's a woman of investment. She's a loyal woman. She's a woman of giving. It's basically part of her nature. So if you basically lost that nature in her, you basically lost everything. Know how to get the best out of her, because she is ready to give the best out of her. She's really ready. SubhanAllah. I mean, sorry, ladies. I know you're confused. I'm confusing you here. It's like, is she anti-women? Is she pro-women? I'm a woman myself. All right. I cannot be anti-women, but I can advocate for women by telling them where and how they might lose their rights without them recognizing. So I would basically say where they go wrong, and by telling them where they go wrong, I'm basically not here trying to dictate and judge them, but trying to give the advice and trying to help them, and by advocating for them, trying to help them make the right choices, not based on my own perspective, but based on the, let me call it, the inspiration that we would get from the Quran and Sunnah. So let's continue. فَلَا تَمِيلُوا كُلَّ الْمَيْلِ. Is it possible? Now here's one thing. فَلَا تَمِيلُوا كُلَّ الْمَيْلِ, and where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is basically saying, well, yes, polygamous marriages, they're more likely to have drama, more likely, just like in the beginning of Surah Nisa, and where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala basically right there, وَإِنْ خِفْتُمْ أَلَّا تُقْسِطُوا فِي الْيَتَامَى فَانكِحُوا مَا طَابَ لَكُم مِّنَ النِّسَاءِ مَثْنَى وَثُلَاثَ وَرُبَاعَ. And then what? And then it basically, and if you fear that you will not be just, oh, what happens? Then فَوَاحِدَ. Then stick to one. When you look at that, if you fear that you won't be just, then you're looking at this area of it. Let's say in where, when if it's telling you that there is a possibility of injustice, then that actually tells you that indeed polygamous marriages are more likely to be full of drama. Polygamous marriages are more likely to be an area of injustice. And certainly that does not necessarily mean that we're supposed to advocate against polygamy, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had regarded it permissible, not necessarily because it basically supports the man, but no, it is basically to support the women. So polygamy is really in support of women more than it is in support of men, believe it or not. How is it more in support? Remember, if a woman were to accept being a second wife or a third wife, why would she accept it? Because by not accepting it, to her, she would be living in a worse circumstance. Why would she accept it? Because she recognizes, this is basically women recognizing the second, the third, the fourth wife, they're recognizing that this is a better alternative for me, and that's why she accepted it. And certainly the first wife might not like it, and certainly she's going to be feeling that, hey, you neglected me. And it is true that in certain circumstances, it might actually be true where that of course, sometimes that she had invested all these years, like the scenario that I had said, invested all these years and then eventually, wanting to buy instead of wanting to buy a bigger house and something more beautiful, etc. Now it's basically going for someone else. Remember, you're doing it for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Certainly, it carries within it some form of, some form of an injustice within it. Certainly, we're not denying that. Certainly, there must be some recognition for the woman, but at the same time, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had still permitted polygamy, still permitted it for al-maslaha al-'amma muqaddama ala al-maslaha al-khassa. I want to look at this because this is a legal maxim in Islam. What is that? The legal maxim says al-maslaha al-'amma muqaddama. Let me write that down. When we're looking at polygamy, that's one main reason why Islam permitted it. Al-maslaha al-'amma muqaddama ala al-maslaha al-khassa. When we're speaking about law, of course, there is one, al-maslaha al-'amma. The public interest is considered prior and precedes the personal interest. So when we're looking at polygamy, for example, the public interest in making polygamy, bringing about a solution to, of course, let's say a problem where we're having an increase probably rates of divorce, we're having women basically outnumber the men within the society. We have, even if it's at 2%, 2% actually means millions here. And we're also having women more subject to being single parents, etc. So in that situation, we would basically look at al-maslaha al-amma, in where the public interest, we would take it in a bigger consideration than a personal interest. So does that mean you're basically neglecting and you're not considerate over my feelings as a first wife? No, it's not that we're neglecting your feelings, but it is basically here considering the bigger number and the bigger statistics, basically the more women that are in that situation really being victims here. So we're wanting them to have a more and a better opportunity and a higher chance of being within a marriage bond than actually being neglected within the society. So we're basically giving more spaces for being considerate over more women than just one woman. All right. So this is basically the whole idea of why we're looking at al-maslaha al-amma muqaddama al-maslaha al-khassa. So when we're looking at polygamy, it is really presented as a solution, despite the fact that it carries within it some form of an injustice, where the Quran right there is telling you, وَلَن تَسْتَطِيعُوا أَن تَعْدِلُوا, there's no way that you're going to be completely just, and there's going to be a lot of drama. فَلَا تَمِيلُوا كُلَّ الْمَيْلِ. And here it is, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is basically telling it to you that yes, polygamy does carry within it a lot of such injustices, a lot of such drama, a lot of trauma as well, but at the same time, that preventing it entirely is going to be bringing in a catastrophic outcome, even far worse than the drama that polygamy might actually bring, than the drama or even the trauma that polygamy itself might bring. So what do? There is another qaida fiqhiyya in where the qaida fiqhiyya basically says, إذا تعارضت مفسدتان روعي أعظمهما ضررا بارتكاب أخفهما. What does that mean? So it's basically the lesser evil. If we basically have two conflicting problems or two conflicting harms, we would basically be considerate over the bigger harm by even committing the less harm. So let's say same thing in medicine. By causing an incision, we're basically here going to be probably having maybe an infection, etc. But by leaving, let's say, the cyst or whatever it is that is in the body, by leaving it there, that is probably going to bring about more complications. And that's the same thing. So why does the Quran actually permit polygamy, even though it recognizes that there is a higher chance of injustice and a higher chance of drama and trauma that is going to be a result? Well, basically because it considers that by not considering, or by at least by making polygamy as illegal, or basically not permitting polygamy, that the drama, that the trauma, that the injustice is going to be even more than permitting it. It's going to be even more than permitting it. So in that situation, what do? We basically look at, in where al-Qaeda, right there, these two different legal maxims, in where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala basically says, فَلَا تَمِيلُوا كُلَّ الْمَيْلِ. So therefore, do not go far. Yes, there are certain things that you cannot control, basically right there, perhaps the feelings, perhaps certain emotions that you cannot necessarily control, whether in love or intimacy, or even having certain affection towards that woman, etc. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala basically described this as the reality of human nature. So in that situation, this is not included, but you have to make sure that you do not leave her فَتَذَرُوهَا كَالْمُعَلَّقَةِ. Don't leave her كَالْمُعَلَّقَةِ. We're just going to end until this ayah and we're basically done, inshallah. What is فَتَذَرُوهَا كَالْمُعَلَّقَةِ? فَتَذَرُوهَا, the word فَتَذَرُوهَا means to basically abandon her like she's mu'allaqa, like she is hung or just hanging in there. A lot of things that we could actually get out of al-mu'allaqa. Number one, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is basically saying, well, yes, if you are right there in a relationship, basically in a polygamous relationship, just make sure that you're not completely abandoning her, or at least abandoning her and leaving her like she is basically just hanging in there. She's not married, yet she's married, yeah, she's not divorced, but then you're basically just abandoning her right there. So, and of course, this basically is telling the men that if you're in this marriage, you have to let her be grounded, let her feel like she's belonging, let her feel that she's stable, let her feel, and that's basically what's going to let her be capable of bringing more of an investment, more of basically loyalty to you. So don't let her be mu'allaqa. What is al-mu'allaq? Al-mu'allaq is hanging. When you're hanging, you're basically just hanging in there, where you're just going left and right. And what does that actually cause? It causes a locomotion. That locomotion, it basically starts, of course, whenever, even in physics, you've got something that's creating a locomotion, it basically starts creating a drama and basically creates a locomotion in the world around it. Of course, we know that. Whenever there's something creating a movement, it basically moves the things around it as well. So if you want to bring about stability within your household, give this woman stability. Even if you don't like her, even if she's not your favorite, even if she has these attitudes, give her stability. Don't let her mu'allaqa, and she will give you stability. In other words, the secret recipe to you reducing the drama, the trauma, the injustice within your polygamous relationship is basically to give this woman a sense of stability, a sense of, and of course, because the mu'allaqa is the opposite of that. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you can't just take the words and just move on. You have to see the relationship, the simile between the word and even the relationship in terms of psychology right here. When a person is feeling mu'allaq, they're hanging. When they're hanging, they're basically feeling they're not stable. When they're not stable, they're basically going to start search for stability. This is ABCs in nature. If you're not feeling stable, even in chemistry, you're not feeling stable, you're going to start searching. You're going to create a locomotion. You're going to start moving around in search of stability. And in search of stability, you might actually end up creating creating some kind of a movement in where you might actually find yourself stepping on other people's toes. In other words, this is also telling us that a lot of, let's call it the main recipe for a lot of drama and a lot of trauma within the polygamous marriages, and where things are going wrong, is really a result of the man. Yes, it's the man's fault. How? Why? Are you being a chauvinist? No, it's not being a chauvinist. It's that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala told you to be in responsibility, be in charge. by you leaving, and basically it is part of our nature that we cannot handle feeling that we are abused. We cannot accept injustice. By you leaving this woman kalmu'allaqa, like she's hanging in there, you're not giving her her rights. She's going to basically start transgressing the limits. And you, as a person in charge, as the person that is qawam, you have to be the person to make sure that you're putting everything in stability. You have the keys. You've got the keys.
Jazakallah khair. This lecture was so awesome and so in depth, mashallah. And subhanallah, a lot of times we hear when it's a male, we'll hear one side. When it's a female, we'll hear another side, because we're both different, subhanallah, and it will never be totally, you know what I mean?
Well,
But
absolutely.
alhamdulillah,
You know
alhamdulillah.
what, Noura? I come from polygamous marriages. I'm originally from Al Khalil, from
Mhm.
Palestine. And Al
Yeah.
Khalil, out of Palestine, we are known to being the most polygamous people. My grandfather, both my grandfathers got married 1 to 4, 1 to 6. Of course, not at one time, but most all of them were polygamous, and my father is married to 2, and yeah, my uncles, each one is actually almost all of them, or actually a couple of them are actually polygamous. So we're actually a polygamous family, all right, and we see it. We see it, and it's really important to keep that in mind, in where this is not at all an attack on men, but this is an issue of telling them that this is a taklif, not a tashrif. What is the difference? When you're looking at, let me state it right here. When we're speaking about polygamy right there, yes, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave you the right to practice polygamy, but it's a taklif, not tashrif. What is the difference between taklif and tashrif? Taklif actually means it's a responsibility. It's a responsibility. It's basically a commitment. It's something that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave you the qawama to be in charge. So therefore, that's what you're going to be held accountable for. And it's not an honor. It's not an honor where, yeah, I'm so honored to actually have more than one woman. Well, probably you might have seen it as an honor. But remember, on Judgment Day, the Prophet ﷺ actually said in the hadith, let's look at this hadith and actually see this hadith.
Oh yeah, I remember that
The
hadith.
Prophet ﷺ actually said, من كانت له امرأتان فلم يعدل بينهما جاء يوم القيامة وشقه مائل. Whoever had 2 wives and he was not just in between them, on Judgment Day, they would actually come with one side of their body actually leaning, with one of it leaning. Although, yes, you could see Kharju Ahmad, some scholars regarded it as not necessarily authentic, but in general, you could see that there is a resource for it. Here we go, Ahmad, Abu Dawud, Tirmidhi, Nasa'i, etc. And of course, when we look at that, just by the issue of tadaruha kal mu'allaqa, this is basically telling you that by you leaving her that way, as if she's not married and as if she's not even divorced, and what you're really making her feel that she's basically not feeling grounded. You are basically, by making a person that you are married to feel that they're not stable, that you are the cause of what made her feel not stable. You are the cause. You caused all of this. How did he cause all of this? You came to household A and you told her about B. And you went to B and you told her about A. And you went to C and you told her about D. You were the main halaqat wasl.
Yeah, that's
You were the
totally
main
haram.
person in
Because
all of this.
you're not even supposed to be revealing the privacies and all that.
It's not just the privacies, Noura. It's an issue of you were the person that basically brought in these tensions. You were the bridge. So what would you advise? Let A feel like she has her own area. She's independent. Don't bring about anything about B. Even B, please don't call him when he's at A's house, unless there's an emergency. And Mister, when you're at A's house, don't tell her about B and what you do there. Don't even bring up her name. Let her feel she's independent. Same thing. When you're at B's house, don't tell her about A. And don't create, and this is something often that happens in where they want to live some form of utopian relationships, like, oh, they're sisters together. There's no way. Don't be too utopian. There's a reality. To actually think they can be like sisters together, etc. No, it's part of their nature that she's going to be feeling jealous. Live reality. Don't live utopian. The truth of the matter, she is jealous. They have these 2, 3 wives, whatever. They basically have you, and they're all racing to win you. The second you basically create a form of competition between them, you had just created more and fueled more animosity between them. Don't create a competition between them thinking that it will make them somehow, or make you feel like you're the king everybody's fighting over. Don't do that. Guess what? You're gonna end up, the man is gonna end up paying the price, and the women are gonna pay the price, and the children are gonna pay the price, and everybody's just going to be really, it's not funny. Other people might think of it as funny. It is not funny. It is not funny to watch wife number 1 or wife number 2, maybe their jealousy, maybe overcoming, or maybe sometimes going out of hand. It's not funny to watch that woman burn in her emotions, in how she might actually feel jealous, feel neglected, she feels not loved, she feels that I was basically favored by, he favored someone else over me, etc. It's not funny to look at somebody's I guess pains, and how she feels that her femininehood was scarred right there. It's not funny. And even for the man to think it's funny, and that to think that, oh, it shows that she cares about me, and yet you're watching somebody burn, it's not at all showing empathy. You want to show empathy, you want to show love, let her feel like she's the only one there. Let her feel that like the other person doesn't exist. Don't bring up the other person at all, like she doesn't even exist. When you're at her home, just make her feel that she's just the only one there. Even if you're probably hurt, even if she brings it up, just say, sorry, I don't want you to bring the other home up. You have to, there is some form of power that the man has to practice in where say, no, we need to end speaking about the other household. That's ghaiba. That's what the Prophet ﷺ even did. When Sayyidah Aysha talked about Safiya and she, or Hafsa, and she did with a hand gesture and said that, kind of that she was a short person, the Prophet ﷺ told her, if you would have said it, it would have been enough to contaminate all the oceans and all the waters on earth. What was the Prophet ﷺ telling her? You have to learn how not to talk about other people. You have to learn the adab, that if you really want to live a positive life, don't invest a negative behavior. Simple as that. That's what the Prophet ﷺ was teaching the Sayyidah Aysha. And that's what a man is supposed to do. When the other wife says anything, it's like, oh, have taqwa. You can't bring the other woman up. Have taqwa. Don't even talk about her. Have taqwa. Speaking about anybody's back, or talking about them, that's basically considered as backbiting or gossip. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala prohibited that. Remember, you've got the akhirah. I'm gonna die. Everybody's gonna die. And everybody's gonna die. So it's not worth losing your akhirah. What are you doing here? You're creating in them that taqwa. you're really being the qawam right there. So therefore, who's going to be responsible more? The person that's going to be in charge is the biggest person that we would hold accountable. The most person that we'd hold accountable is really the person in charge. So therefore, the man, you are the one that will be held the most accountable when this polygamous marriage is going out of hand. So just to keep that in mind. And we'll end it right there, inshallah. And Rabbi yahfadhkum jami'an. Wa sallam ala Sayyidina Muhammad. And inshallah, we will continue tomorrow. And assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Wa salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.